From the outside, Richard's life looked airtight, polished like a glass tower catching the morning sun. He was known as the man who never hesitated, never softened, never lost control. Decades of long nights, ruthless negotiations, and perfectly timed silences had built an empire that obeyed his every move. People admired him from a distance, the way one admires a storm that never quite reaches shore. Yet behind the tailored suits and quiet authority, there was a man who went home to rooms that echoed too loudly. Success kept him warm, but it never held him close. Richard's days followed a strict rhythm, like a metronome set by ambition itself. Morning meetings smelled of strong coffee and polished wood. Afternoons hummed with numbers and strategy. Evenings ended with city lights blinking like indifferent witnesses. He trusted systems more than people, structure more than emotion, control more than comfort. Somewhere along the way, tenderness had become a liability he learned to lock away. And still, in rare moments of silence, something heavy stirred in his chest. A reminder that power does not quiet loneliness. He never named that feeling, but it followed him faithfully. Then, almost unnoticed, a new presence entered the building, quiet but unmistakably different. She didn't demand attention, didn't compete for space, yet the air seemed to shift when she passed. Richard barely registered her at first, just another name on paper, another role filled efficiently, but there was a calm steadiness about her, a way she listened that felt unfamiliar, almost disarming. Something subtle began to loosen, though he couldn't say what or why, and without realizing it, the carefully sealed world he lived in had just opened a door he never planned to unlock. Working side by side, Richard began to notice details he'd never paid attention to before. The way her voice softened tense meetings, the quiet confidence in her posture, the patience she carried like a second skin. Conversations stretched longer than necessary, drifting from reports to reflections, from strategy to memory. For the first time in years, Richard found himself listening without calculating the outcome. It unsettled him, yet it felt strangely grounding, like standing barefoot on solid earth after years of concrete. Slowly, almost against his will, the walls he'd built started to thin. He shared fragments of himself he'd never offered anyone at work, small stories wrapped in humor, confessions disguised as observations. She responded not with awe, but with understanding, and that difference mattered more than he realized. The boundary between authority and affection blurred in quiet moments, over late-night emails and shared silences. Richard told himself it was harmless, that control was still firmly in his hands, even as his focus shifted away from numbers and toward her presence. What Richard mistook for strength was becoming vulnerability, and it crept in gently, without warning. He felt lighter, hopeful in a way that scared him, like opening a window after years of stale air. The idea of love, once dismissed as impractical, now hovered close, warm and convincing. He didn't see the risk in trusting her, didn't question the timing or the intensity, and while he leaned forward into this unfamiliar feeling, unseen currents from her past were already moving beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise. Beneath the surface of their growing connection, something else simmered quietly, something Richard couldn't see, not yet. The woman's smile, the easy way she laughed, each gesture was a thread, pulling Richard deeper into the web she was weaving around him. But the truth was, her kindness wasn't born of affection. It was born from something darker. She wasn't here by chance. No, her every move was calculated. Her past, a tapestry of loss and resentment, had been painted by his company, by his very hands. Every decision he'd made, every deal he'd closed had left a scar somewhere she'd been. She wasn't just an employee. She was a ticking clock, and Richard was blissfully unaware of the inevitable countdown. Her backstory, hidden behind soft eyes and an unassuming demeanor, was a story of betrayal. Years ago, someone in Richard's company had destroyed the life of someone she loved, perhaps a career ruined by a bad investment, or a family member swallowed by the cold machinery of corporate greed. Her affection for him now was a carefully calculated mask, a slow game of revenge played with all the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. She wasn't just working with Richard, she was working on him. Each intimate moment shared, each touch of kindness, was not an expression of genuine warmth, but a maneuver in a delicate dance, one that would eventually lead to his undoing. For Richard, however, it was all too new, too thrilling. He was drawn to her like a moth to flame, convinced by his own pride that no one, no matter how clever, could deceive him. As he slowly opened himself up to the affection she seemed to offer so freely, he never once considered the possibility that she might be playing him. His walls were down, but what he didn't realize was that they weren't the only thing that had fallen. His empire, his carefully constructed world, was about to be rocked in ways he couldn't even imagine. He was already too far gone, swept away in something that felt like love, but was, in reality, the perfect storm. The first cracks appeared quietly, the way disasters often do. A delayed report here, a missed number there. Nothing alarming at first glance. Richard blamed fatigue, distraction, the cost of caring too much for the first time in years. Boardrooms that once felt like extensions of his will now carried a strange tension, the air heavier, voices sharper. At night, he stared at the ceiling, the city's glow bleeding through the windows, telling himself this was temporary. He still believed he was in control, even as the ground beneath him began to shift. Then the leaks surfaced, precise and devastating. Confidential data found its way into the wrong hands. Partners grew distant. Lawyers started returning calls with carefully measured tones. Richard felt the cold grip of fear for the first time, sharp and undeniable. He replayed conversations in his head, searching for missteps, while she stood beside him, calm, reassuring, her hand resting lightly on his arm. That simple gesture grounded him, or so he thought. He didn't see how her comfort was timed perfectly, how trust was being used like a lever against him. When the truth finally began to take shape, it hit him like a sudden drop in the dark. Patterns emerged, connections he could no longer ignore, and with them, a sinking realization that love had made him careless. The confrontation loomed, unspoken but inevitable, heavy in the spaces between their conversations. Richard felt something fracture inside him, not just his empire, but his sense of self. And as everything he'd built started to collapse inward, the reckoning he'd unknowingly invited was finally stepping into the light. The fall came faster than he could comprehend. What had once been a fortress, his reputation, his empire, was reduced to rubble in what felt like an instant. Richard had always been able to fix problems, to buy his way out, to talk his way through. But this was different. No amount of money or charm could undo the damage. The betrayal cut deeper than any boardroom deal, sharper than any enemy's words. He stood amidst the wreckage, surrounded by the pieces of what had once been his life, his achievements, his pride. And all he could hear was the haunting echo of his own failure. She stood before him, the quiet architect of his ruin, but there was no triumph in her eyes, only an unsettling calm. His eyes searched hers, looking for any hint of regret, but there was nothing, only a distant look, as though her mission had been completed long ago. Her smile was almost imperceptible, but it was there, a small acknowledgement that everything he had built was now gone, and he had no one to blame but himself. Her revenge was not sweet. It was something colder, something devoid of joy. She had never cared for power or wealth. Her victory was the quiet justice of watching him crumble piece by piece. As Richard faced the consequences of his choices, something shifted within him. The walls that had once protected him were now gone, and in their place, a raw, vulnerable man stood before the ruins of his empire. The isolation that had once seemed comfortable now felt suffocating. He had everything he could ever want: money, respect, influence, and yet in the end it was nothing. Not without the connections, the trust, the love that he had so carelessly pushed away. And as the woman walked away from him, leaving him in the ashes of his own making, Richard finally understood the true cost of power and the price of vengeance.